Welcome to Happy Times and Places, this podcast that I almost put out without adding this opening salvo. That's how important it is. It's a podcast. I watch Doctor Who. I have to choose some good things about the episode I'm watching that have been chosen by a friend of mine.
Hello Toby, and anyone who's watching or listening to this. My name's Michael Dennis. I'm a writer and stage manager. Thank you for inviting me in. The story I've chosen for you to watch is The Macra Terror.
Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places. It's time for episode 2 of The Macra Terror, the story that has been chosen by Michael Dennis, with whom I've communicated over many years, but we've never actually met. He has, by coincidence, worked with my other half, but I think you get a sense that you have something in common with people, even if you've not met in the flesh. So Michael and I are simpatico in terms of our work and contacts and that sort of thing. In our tastes, well, not so far. I nearly chose, but for very different reasons. No, for the same reasons, but I thought there was subtext to it. The same thing as he did for episode 1. So, will we choose the same thing about episode 2? The chances are very slight. I never win this, but it's more about the journey than the destination in it. It's very tantric in that way. So, I have the Blu-ray of The Macra Terror, the animated version, which means that I am going on to episode reconstructions. And I am on the episode menu that has that lack of a space after the dash after episode 1 before play with narration, which will haunt me for all time. I am going to play it without narration, as is my wont. There's only one person talking over this, and it's me. And the reason I'm not doing the animation, just to recap, is because the animation is a thing, with various things that will pull me towards talking about the animation, whereas I'm going to try and talk about the story as originally broadcast as close as I possibly can. The animation, by the way, is excellent. I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job. Beautiful work on the Macra, which we're going to see the real version of. The version from back in 1967. So let's have a look right now at the Macra Terror in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, I didn't mention, did I, that this is the first... Because, in fact... Early on, in the early murky days of Doctor Who history, it was always rumoured, and it was in Peter Haining's Key to Time book, a mistake in a Peter Haining book. I'm going to do a podcast about those, because I'm not sure mistake is the right word. Anyway, that the face of the Doctor first appeared in The Faceless Ones. It appears on the Macra Terror, but we didn't know that for quite some time. Love this music of Dudley Simpson's, this heavy organ stuff. So there we go. There's the Macra. And the other rumour was that for years, because when this was, as I say, the first I ever saw of this was the picture of the controller with the claw about to pull him away at the end of episode 2. And then when they did the DWM archive, or then when I saw the DWM archive in a back issue, I think the issue preceded the 20th anniversary special. Anyway, when I got my hands on a copy of the DWM that had the archive, it was illustrated with that picture, lovely, and lots of shots, or the 2 publicity shots that were taken and used of Peter Jeffries, the pilot, and Gerton Klauber. Here he is as doing a very deliciously snide turn as Ola, the chief of police. He's a sort of rather portly, pompous, power-hungry bully of the kind that these dramas are, that are good value to these dramas. He's an arse, basically. But Gerten Klauber does a nice job. Gerten Klauber having been the galley master in episode 2 of The Romans, as a nod to his role in the Carry On film. Although he's not, like, again, it was supposed to, we were told by Doctor Who Celebration that he was playing in The Romans. He was playing the galley master as he played in the Carry On film, but he doesn't play the galley master. He is one of Marcus or Spensius, the shopkeepers, isn't he? But he's not. But anyway, doesn't matter. It's a long time ago, and it was less easy to check these things. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't looked it up ages and ages ago when I was doing the commentary for The Romans. But that's a whole other story, and probably when we're doing that for this, I'll do that anecdote again. That's bad, isn't it? But Peter Jeffrey, of course, is the main guest star who I believe told the director John Davis that he sort of did it because his kids didn't really believe he was an actor. Until he'd done a Doctor Who. My ex-wife actually then worked with his daughter sometime after he died, and I sent her all the bits from Running Through Corridors where I eulogise Peter Jeffrey because he's brilliant. There's not much to eulogise here. The pilot is not much of a part, it has to be said. That it's cast up really because it's not asking too much of Peter Jeffrey. He's great. He stands there and he's good, and he's he's got the proper charm and decency that the pilot and the face of the colony needs to have. And he's got a great face which is good, and there's a lovely telesnap there that can suggest inner darkness and turmoil at the flick of an acting switch. But he's much more value in The Androids of Tara, whereas Count Grendel, he is one of the great Doctor Who villainous turns, and I absolutely love him, and I cannot wait to do The Androids of Tara. And I love this turn where I love this relationship actually that the Doctor has with Medoc, where they sort of gradually win each other over. And even, the Doctor said to the pilot, I hope you're not going to believe everything that Medoc says. So he's obviously not quite convinced that he and Medoc are on the same side, as it were. But Medoc comes in, and Medoc, who of course is the portrayal and the writing suggests he is slightly damaged, so therefore he's not entirely reliable as an ally, because he's been left slightly unhinged by the fact that he knows about the Macra and the fact that nobody believes him, and the suggestion as in the they're not tortures at the interrogation scenes that he's been pretty much through the mill, but I love the fact that makes the Doctor very sympathetic with him, and Troughton plays all that stuff very well, that sort of uncertain allyship. And then I love that bit where I can exactly imagine how Troughton looks at him when he's pretending that the Doctor was in fact coming to take him in. Troughton will have given him a sort of tacit, I know what you're doing there, mate, and I'm grateful, whilst also presenting a face to the pilot and to Ola that, he's going along with that story and he's totally surprised and blah-de-blah-de-blah. He's very good at that. Face of his is very good. And I can imagine what he does, but also I know that there'll be loads of facial expressions in this episode that we can only dream of. And this is Graham Lehman as the controller, but the voice is not Graham Lehman. The voice is Dennis Gocher, who figures quite heavily in Kenneth Williams' diaries. They were mates. They worked together quite young, and I think Kenneth Williams initially didn't take to him. I don't think Kenneth Williams takes to a lot of people very quickly. But then they actually developed a friendship, and they were friends forever. They were friends for life. And Gocher survived Williams and actually crops up in a documentary about him very briefly, so we can see what Gocher looks like. Well, I've got spotlight pictures of him too. But Graham Lehman is the controller who is in those photos. I love this. There is no such thing as Macra. Macra do not exist, and this is well done on the reconstruction. And I'm assuming the camera, cut to the close up of this impassive Big Brother face as well. And I love that and the way that the music kicks in. But I love the whole litany of there's no such thing as Macra, because that's daring a society, isn't it? That's saying we have a name for something that doesn't exist. Well, if it doesn't exist, how come there's a name for it? And it's sort of asking you to do doublethink. It's asking you to be Orwellian with yourself, to go, well, I acknowledge that there's this terrible thing, but to fit into this colony, I have to put it into my mind and absolutely thoroughly believe, how many fingers am I holding up? Do you see Macra? No, I do not. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. There is no such thing as Macra. It's a very simple sentence, but it means so much, because it means you're contradicting yourself within what you're saying. This thing that I have a name for absolutely does not exist. And yet we have to keep mentioning it to stop you saying that it exists. For why? Well, because it exists. This lulling sleep stuff is good. The voice is Richard Beale, who is the voice of the Refusions in The Ark. He's Bat Masterson. That's his best part in Doctor Who. Bat Masterson in The Gunfighters. And then he's the Minister of Ecology in The Green Death, the one he part. He was a great friend of Michael Bryant, but he was a good voice man, had a lovely deep voice. He was quite a glass half full kind of guy from my brief experience of him, but I found him very entertainingly curmudgeonly, and I fought to get him on the Gunfighters commentary because I knew he was still around, and he was 90 by then, but he was still working. He was still acting. He was still acting in his 90s. He was still ringing. I remember I was coming back from a gig in Liverpool and listening to Any Answers on the radio on the Sunday morning, and he called in and was talking about the Russian seamen he'd served with in the war, and he's written a book about his wartime service, One Man's War, and he lived to be 94, 96. He only died last year before, a couple of years ago, as I record this. And had only retired from acting a couple of years prior to that. And a wonderful deep voice he had, and he was a bit of a regular in EastEnders, and I believe he could have been in that longer, but he wanted to spend time with his boat. Great man of the sea. That's Richard Beale, who plays the propaganda voice, the one that lures them into sleep. And of course, Jamie and Ben and Polly. Jamie, she wasn't supposed to be in this. Here's Ben, poor old Ben, in his, let's not forget, this is a good story for Ben and Polly, and they're gone next story, and not even at the end of next story. I know their last scene's in episode 6 of The Faceless Ones, but they get hoofed in episode 2. So this is really their swan song, and there's no sign that these are companions on their way out. And I'm sure I've said it before, I think that the loss of Ben and Polly, and it's no offence to Fraser Hines, who is an iconic and wonderful Doctor Who companion in Jamie. I just wish maybe there'd be a stretch of stories between Power of the Daleks and the Highlanders where Ben and Polly could have adventures with the second Doctor. And I wouldn't want to trade in any of the other stories, so maybe we'd have to have an extra year of Patrick Troughton. Oh, what a shame that would be. I love him. But I just think Ben and Polly, they're really good actors. They have a nice rapport. I think they're good characters, and they could have done a lot more with them. The promise they show in the War Machines is so strong, and I'm assuming Ben, because Medoc gets offed in episode 3, I'm assuming that maybe in the original, some of what Ben does in part 4 is what Medoc would normally have done. I've got no proof for that. I've got no proof for quite a few things I might say in this, because a lot of it is guesswork. But did I say at the beginning, in terms of the yes, that you may have had some advice. Do this, do that, do the other. My advice to you: don't do anything of the sort. I love that, and always question. And that's important in this story to say always question the veneer. But I the principle underneath that of going always question what you're being told. People don't necessarily have your Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I mean, I wouldn't have even qualified this 20 years ago. I absolutely always think and rebel against authority. As I get older, I go, well, within reasons, obey traffic laws and don't litter. So your anarchistic streak always goes when you're paying your council tax. But of course, maybe that's how they're screwing me down. Okay. But I think Michael Craze acts this Ben being taken over very well, and I like that he and the way that he repeats the mantras of the colony is very good. It's like he sort of learnt it by rote, but there's also a sense of a slight inner battle going on. It's a well pitched performance from Michael Craze, who I think was good. But yes, I was talking about the photos of Peter Jeffrey and Gerton Klauber in the DWM, and there was no picture of the Macra apart from the claw coming to hoik the controller out. And for many years there was a sort of rumour or an understanding that there actually weren't no Macra. There was no photographic evidence of the Macra. And I remember the first time I saw the one picture. This is way before telesnaps were even when the collection of telesnaps was less than half its present size, when we didn't even conceive that they could exist. There's one picture of the Macra taken outside Shorecraft, isn't there? So it's not even a picture of it doing stuff in the story. And I do sort of think now, you're doing a Doctor Who story about giant crabs, and you arrange a photo shoot for, I love Peter Jeffrey, and I'm very fond of Gerton Klauber, but you think you've got a giant crab in the studio and nobody's going to take like tons of pictures of that. And Kenneth Sharp, the designer, there's loads of pictures. The Frame, wonderful magazine that came out sometimes later when fan scholarship went up a notch. They interviewed Kenneth Sharp, the designer, and he'd got lots of pictures of the set. So we've got lots of lovely pictures of sort of pipes on walls and stuff. Still no picture of the big crab, which I wonder suggests that nobody was terribly proud of it. I can see that guard is Steve Emerson, who, like Kenneth Sharp, turns up again in the Claws of Axos. Steve Emerson is one of the guards, the unit soldiers that gets off in episode 3 when the Axon Man is charging around the complex. It's him and Derek Martin. Anyway, this scene I know that John Davis said was all his own work. This interrogation of Medoc, where it's supposed to be, I think, so he's got him on this revolving plinth, and there looks to be a sort of white-coated doctor there with a bit of a comb over and some glasses. Now that's a non-speaking extra character, but it's a nice little bit of. So I suspect that was one of those scenes that John Davis, a director who we have no work in Doctor Who to go off, but from what I understand from the bits of paper that he had to direct, he made a lot of changes, a lot of tried to up the scale or up the tempo or up the atmosphere. That throbbing atmosphere, I think, is very much what John Davis brought to it. And I'm still in touch with John Davis. I'm slightly perplexed because he agreed to do my Who's Round and was very, very lovely. And then didn't want to do the DVD commentary. And we tried to persuade him, and he just couldn't make the connection between what he did and the animation. He was going, but that has nothing to do with me. So it's like, well, because we used the soundtrack. And he wasn't unpleasant, and I've had long conversations on him on the phone since about other stuff. And he's helped me out with a couple of things. And but we just didn't get him for the DVD at all. And I still to this day don't quite know, because I don't do any of that. I just give addresses and numbers. I'm not a producer or anything like that. But I certainly said invoke if John wants to talk about it and be wants to run it by anybody, I'll help. But he was just like, no, it's fine. I just don't want to do it, which was true. So I've got more interview with him than the official DVD that's in the thing, which I think is mad, because I was, I'm a nobody that just dropped him a line out of the blue. Margot Hayho, production, AFM production manager, put in a good word, but it was not a professional venture that I was doing. But anyway, thanks to John. But who's had a great career. He produced, Ruth Mendel Mysteries and things like that, and directed the BBC's War and Peace. So, he obviously, although this is an early job for him, he's a director that knew his stuff. But that's not a guarantee that this would have been great, because I think there are some directors at the beginning of their career who have illustrious careers who don't, who the evidence of that is not necessarily in their work on Doctor Who. But I do like this. I love this sort of decayed, outlying buildings of this beautiful, jolly colony with its boarded up windows, and it gives a chance for darkness and spookiness and we're going to get some clips. I love this. The clip. So there are such thing as Macra. Look at that. I remember when I first saw this on the Ice Warriors collection, and they did a documentary, and it's nice and dark. Actually, it's nicely lit. That. I mean, the Macra is not the most mobile of beasts, and Michael Craze has to sort of gallantly not hit it with an axe, clearly. But thank goodness to the Australian censors for cutting these bits, because they just give us a little bit of moving picture of Macra Terror, which is one of those handful of stories that we have no complete episodes of. But I love this sequence with Ben and Polly, and that sort of rattly organ, oppressive night music. Night of the Crabs, eh? There's a book called Night of the Crabs. Guy N. Smith. His daughter and son were at my school, actually. My comp that I went to. But we had the books already on our shelves. I remember being very excited by that. It's funny that Terror is cut as well. Just Polly being afraid is cut. There's another bit now, isn't there? There's another clip coming up. Oh, I love the fact that we can see it. And it's just, that's all it is. It's just them running into a claw. But again, it's those glimpses. I love the claw. I think the claw, it being a crab is fantastic, because you can just have the solo claw, and because after of course there is only that one photo of the Macra, but then that cine film turned up of that sort of short film that was done at showcasing what was going on at Shawcraft, and it looks like they're making more than one Macra, but it's not. It's because it's taken over various different times. It's still just the one Macra model, but I think there are extra claws. So I think there's one whole Macra, but I think there's a couple of extra claws. John, when I interviewed him, said he thought that they built more than one, but I think he was mistaken, because he's certainly mistaken about something else that I will cover later. And that's the problem when you're interviewing people. Sometimes you have to make a judgment call and go, I think with the best will in the world, they might have made the wrong call on that one, which I know is a very lofty position to take, but sometimes you have to. I'd always rather go to a primary source, which is people who were there at the time. But the fact is that I love the way that he does. There's no such thing as Macra repeating it. Like, it's actually quite frightening if you're if the evil force at the heart of this colony. I love all that stuff. Trout does all that brilliant. But I love Ben's repetition. If you were a kid seeing lovely, chirpy Cockney Ben repeating this mantra, there is no such thing as and betraying his friends, I actually think that's quite a creepy concept. And the removal of personality is quite a scary thing, and it buys into the whole veneer thing that it has about that I eulogized about part one. And I love this whole bit with the controller, but it's really interesting because that picture of Graham Lehman as the controller being dragged off, he doesn't have the really knackered old makeup job that he's got here. So obviously the publicity still was taken. That just one beautiful shot. Is it one? There may be a couple, but and it's a brilliant. I love that publicity shot with the claw. But he doesn't look like this. So obviously this is a reveal within the episode that actually he's not the handsome, clean-cut guy that you see with his slick back hair that you see in the propaganda picture. He's this poor old geezer who quite what he's been doing. He's been playing chess with a Macra or whatever. And they sort of shove him in, and there's nice stuff said there about the fact that he's a puppet or whatever. But he does not look like that in the publicity picture. He hasn't had the makeup job done yet. So that's quite a curious thing as well. So obviously the photos that they did take were done in something of a hurry. Here, Gerton, grab an iron bar and look scared of an imaginary crab. Peter just looked like the main guest star. Boom. Graham, I'm not in makeup. Doesn't matter. I'm going to shove a claw at you. He's scared. Right, that's the photos done, guys. We're going to go away now. What about the crab? And I love that. The controller being pulled away by the crab is a brilliant thing. And I remember having this on the soundtrack and going, but when's the episode going to end? And it's when she shouts, oh, it's a claw. I love that of the controller being pulled off. I think that's just a great Doctor Who image. I think it's a great Doctor Who moment. It's desperately horrific. And especially with all the sort of shouting going on around it, broadcast and propaganda voice is Richard Beale. Oh, and of course the Macra is Robert Jewell in his... one of his last things he does for Doctor Who, original Dalek operator. So that was episode 2 of the Macra Terror. I really enjoyed that. Do you know what? I've been kind of worried about this one because I do find the telesnap reconstructions hard, and they're obviously not because there's anything wrong with them, just because I'm not watching an episode of Doctor Who, but also they're inevitably episodes that I'm less familiar with because I can't just, I haven't been able to sit down and watch the Macra Terror like I have, most Doctor Who stories. But I think that's okay. I still think there's plenty to say. Haven't mentioned Graham Lehman yet. So I think my favourite thing of episode, I think I'm going to have to sort of encapsulate this in a few things. I'm going to say the Macra. I mean, the fact that they're a crab, I think, is great. But it's the claw. I mean, it's the last word of the episode. The claw. It's a claw. It is. It's the claw. It's that image of the claw pulling the controller out, which is that first picture I saw. Humans with a prey and the chilling, the Macra Terror. And the fact that, some of those, even though some of those extant shots that we have, it's just, the claw just coming into the picture and Polly screaming and running away. When you've got a giant crab who I think is, not as successful as he might be with a bit more money thrown at him and a bit more technical virtuosity at their disposal, the glowy eye and the main shell of the thing, it's a brave stab, but it's fairly, from what we can see, it's fairly immobile, but it's got those claws that. And I know there are 2 spare claws, so that when somebody is surrounded by Macra, you've got the whole beast, and then I will talk about the Macra beast, where that phrase comes from, perhaps in the next episode. But you've just got the 2 claws being manipulated, and there is also an extra bit of Macra goodness when we get to part 4, and that's something that is only recently sort of been come to light thanks to a bit of archaeology. So this is this is still a story we're discovering in a way because facts are so scant about it. And why should that be sandwiched between the stories that we've got bits of and we've got production files of and all that sort of thing? And this is this little island of mysteriousness in many ways. Although we have the soundtrack, we have the telesnaps. There are season 3 stories we don't have telesnaps for. But I just love. I think it's got to be the Macra, the claw. So the fact it's a crab, the fact that they decide to have a Doctor Who story with a giant crab. But the claw, it's the image of the claw. I love the Macra claw. I suspect there's more meat in the claws. I suspect Michael hasn't chosen the Macra claw. But I'm just going with what I think. I'm not trying to play the game. I'm just going with what I like. I know what I like, and I like what I know. So what's Michael chosen for episode 2?
For my favourite thing of episode 2, I'm going to choose the structure of the story.
Yes, that's much more intelligent.
Each episode of this story takes us somewhere new. Part 1, we see outside the colony and the colony entrance. In this episode, the sleeping cubicles, the pilot's headquarters and the new build housing site. Episode 3, the pit and the pit head. And Episode 4, the real control. Each episode advances us somewhere new within the colony, which keeps it visually fresh. Plenty of stories take us somewhere, then leave us there for 4 episodes or more. By the end of Episode 1 of the moon base, for example, we've seen pretty much everywhere we're going to see, but not here. Now, you need to do more than simply walk into a new room to keep us engaged, and Episode 2 does that by effectively digging into the characters of the regulars, or at least Ben, by making him fall under the control of control. This is a really clever thing to do, because we know the Macra exist. We saw them at the end of Episode 1, we saw them at the end of the Moonbase Episode 4. They keep being dangled in front of us and then snatched back. So we've got the threat of them looming, which means we can go off and explore something else, which in this episode is Ben seeming to betray his friends. What's fascinating about this is that it has more plausibility than usual for when a companion acts against character, as Ben, Polly and Jamie are quite an odd mix of people. Ben and Polly, a young, modish, mixed-sex couple, joining the series in the same story in swinging 1966, should be an item. That's what you'd expect. But they're not, wonderfully. And there's never that sense, in the way we had with Barbara and Ian, say, that they ever will be. So theirs is an interesting dynamic. Add to that Jamie, a relative newcomer who has started to upset the apple cart. Only a few weeks previously, in Episode 3 of the Moonbase, he and Ben had actually squared up for a fight, testosterone-fueled and chippy, with Ben sounding petulant and jealous, as though Jamie might be supplanting him in Polly's affections. Both of them in control of their faculties, neither of them possessed or brainwashed. This is a very unusual way for companions to behave in pre-2005 Doctor Who. So, when Ben becomes susceptible to control and starts acting against the others, it's not that he is intrinsically flawed, but that this is a TARDIS team that already has cracks, so the stakes are higher. Now, we don't really go any deeper than that. That's not how the programme was being made then, but it's a tantalising taste of something. And that's the flavour of this episode. It's that rare thing, I would say, in Episode 2 that's better than the episode that preceded it, because of how it's structured. Which I think is my way of sneakily masking having chosen 2 things. I chose one thing, structure. The second thing does not exist.
Oh, very good. But he covers 2. I wouldn't have. I like the structure point. That's something I would never have chosen, because I don't think that's what sort of pops into my mind when I do these. I'm very spontaneous about these. I have to sort of watch and do, whereas obviously my guests have chosen the story and they have a look, and they're sort of they're thinking about what they can say. They don't have to talk at the same time as they watch the episodes either. I'm not complaining. I'm very sanguine about the almost impossibility for me to win this competition. It's just a thing to hang the podcast on, innit? And yeah, you did choose 2 things there, Michael, really, because Michael Craze's being taken over and the dynamic between the companions is nothing to do with the structure that you invoked at the beginning of your 2-minute 55-second choice. But I'll let you have it, because they were both things I didn't choose, because I chose the claw. And I don't mind. I think they all 3 were legitimate things, which just goes to show what a good story the Macra Terror is. And I think it is a good story. I still don't quite have an angle on it, because it's not the story I expected when I, as a kid, found out that there was a Doctor Who story about giant crabs. And yes, I've heard it a few times, and I've watched the animation, but it's still a story I feel I'm sort of discovering every time, because it's not a story I know massively well, and because it's a story that I think has lots of layers and has lots of, and even has, and I forget, and this that's just playing on the episode menu on the DVD, these wonderful outside howls, and it also has an intangibility about it, because no matter how good these telesnap recons are, that they're microseconds of a 25-minute episode. So there's so much that we're missing. So that's because there are sadly, and I'll leave you on this lovely thought before we meet again in episode 3, but there are currently, sadly, unless they're in a cupboard in Uganda somewhere, no such thing as Macra. Bye. You have been receiving subliminal treatment from Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, who you must obey, and my guest, Michael Dennis, who is on Twitter at Michael_Dennis. I'm very grateful to patrons who include Jacob Lumley, Nate Lynch, Darryl McLean, Glenn MacLeod, Pip Madeley, Steve Manfred, Nick Mellish, James Miller, Justin E. Monaghan, Tom Neenan, Jeremiah O'Connor, Mark Trevor Owen, Russell Parker, Phil Pascoe, Richard Patey, Ken Patterson, Thomas Payne, John Pettigrew, Fnord Prefect, Liam Price, Corridors, Rachel T.S., Peter Reed, Paula Reynolds, Alec Rowan, Darren Rule, Gavin Rymil, and Tom Selinsky. Oh, and Robin Bland. The music for these podcasts is by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork by Dylan Patterson. You too could join their number. In fact, one of those people I've just credited has just, I think, cancelled. So you see, they are not a sustainable resource. People cancel for any number of reasons. Some have supported me for a while and want to throw their cash elsewhere, and some have had their fill. All perfectly understandable reasons. But it's just, I only mention it because that means that list of people may sound impressive, but they're hanging on a precipice, and various different reasons might cause them to fall off it. So please go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, and you can join for as little as £3 a month. If you join for a year in advance, you get a 10% discount on top of that, and patrons get advance releases, bonus materials, and all sorts of other goodies. And you get 3 releases per week, whereas on iTunes there's usually 2, and also you're very, very much further ahead on Patreon. I mean, much further ahead, 4 or 5 months. If you're listening to this not on Patreon, some of the patrons who listened to this when it came out have probably died of old age. And that's another reason to go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Or if you don't favour the monthly thing or have too many obligations, or for whatever reason, but you still would like to occasionally throw me the odd copper, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. But the main thing, and the thing I'm most grateful for, well, I'm very grateful to you for listening. It's nice there's an audience out there. That's very flattering and kind of you. But if you do enjoy these, if you could go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and give these Toby Hadoke's Time Travels a 5-star rating and perhaps even a couple of lines of review, because that just helps any passing stranger to be made more aware of what goes on here. And it means that my labours are not in. I'm not beavering away here in a gas-filled mine without the potential of getting clawed by... I'm going to stop now. Just do the thing. Rate everything apart from the previous 3 sentences I've just said. Thank you very much. I do a comedy night in Manchester every Tuesday at Excess Malarkey at the Breadshed, 8 p.m, and that's a comedy club, Excess Malarkey, that has been going for 24 years, and I have compared it pretty much every Tuesday since then. That's a career trajectory. Now, geography may scupper your attendance, but there's a once a month online version at twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. You could go to that instead, and you can follow me on Twitter at Toby Hadoke, these podcasts at Hadoke Podcasts, and indeed Excess Malarkey has a Twitter feed telling you all about the comedy delights that we will have on offer on a weekly basis at Excess Malarkey. That's the letter X, the letter S, and then Malarkey, Malarkey. Okie dokie. I've got a feeling I recorded episode 2 after a bit of a gap after episode 1. I've got a feeling I ended both episodes with that there is no such thing as Macra sign-off. Well, it's such a good idea. It's worth doing twice. The rest, episodes 3 and 4, were recorded on the same night as episode 2, so I don't think I repeat the joke. There is no such thing as that. There is no such thing joke. But you're glad you stayed for that.